In today's video, we explore the origins and history of Warhammer 40k's Adeptus Arbites, Space Cops of the Imperium, Hive City Enforcers, and Muscle for the Inquisition. Hello folks, and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the Adeptus Arbites, the Imperial Space Cops of the 41st Millennium, and their less prestigious younger cousins, the Planetary Enforcers. So as part of the January 27, 2023 Las Vegas Open Warhammer preview, GW announced its latest Kill Team expansion, Soul Shackle, wherein a prison transport ship crashes into the Gallodark Space Hulk, allowing an infamous psychic criminal to escape into the Hulk's rat's nest of tunnels and passageways. An Adeptus Arbites exaction squad is sent in to retrieve the runner, though they will have to contend with a merciless band of Drukhari who are also prowling the area, so it's kind of like Con Air meets Pandorum. So this is another example of GW reimagining some classic minis from decades past. As you can see, the plastic Arbites Proctor Exactant on the left looks quite similar to the metal Arbites Champion on the right. And both of those guys seem like they'd be right at home running the Hall of Justice in Judge Dredd's Mega City 1, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute. Anyway, to commemorate the return of the Imperium's Galactic Police Force, I thought it would be fun to trace the history of the Adeptus Arbites going all the way back to the 1980s, and to also look at some affordable modern proxies for these miniatures, in case you like your space cops cast out of metal instead of plastic. Okay, let's take a look at the roots and evolution of the Adeptus Arbites. This won't be a comprehensive overview because there are many GW catalogs, codices, and magazines I don't have in the library, but I was actually surprised by how many references I was able to dig up just from what I had on hand. So let's start in the mid-1980s, the pre-Rogue Trader days, and look at a major inspiration for both the Adeptus Arbites and, one might argue, the whole satirical tone of Rogue Trader itself, the legendary Judge Dredd. Games Workshop began publishing its licensed Judge Dredd RPG in 1985, which was supported by a line of Judge Dredd figures from Citadel Miniatures. Games Workshop's involvement with Judge Dredd would actually overlap the release of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader in 1987. Here is White Dwarf issue 92 from August of 87, which features a Rogue Trader teaser ad on its inside front cover. That very issue also features 3 adventures for GW's Judge Dredd RPG, which means that Judge Dredd, Mega City 1, and the Hall of Justice were all very much part of GW's zeitgeist when it released Rogue Trader. And speaking of Rogue Trader, that's where the Adeptus Arbites are introduced to the Warhammer 40k universe, so they have been part of the lore since the very beginning. On page 139 of Rogue Trader, we learn that the Adeptus Arbites are commonly called the Judges, and they represent the martial arm of the priesthood, the soldiers and police of the Adeptus Terra. The text goes on to say that their duties usually fall between those of the assassins, who may be obliged to deal with a single troublemaker, and the army, which would be called in to wage an outright war. It says that judges are empowered to act as judge, jury, and executioner, and that citizens have no rights, though perhaps a member of the priesthood or inquisition could claim something as elaborate as a trial. Then on pages 140 and 141, we see an Adeptus Arbites judge talking to an Imperial scribe. The judge is wearing his trademark black leather uniform with bulky shoulder pads and elbow pads, but he is not wearing his visored helmet. The Adeptus Arbites judges are, however, wearing helmets in this 1991 Citadel catalog shot. You can see the classic Arbites shotgun featured on the left, and it's not that different from the shotguns featured in the new Kill Team Arbites squad, so that weapon has stood the test of time. These early 40k Judge minis were designed by the legendary Jess Goodwin. In addition to the shotgun trooper, there's also a judge with a bolter and an officer with a crested helmet, bolt pistol, and power maul. You can also see that all 3 uniforms are decorated with eagle insignias, once again harking back to Judge Dredd. Next, we'll jump forward to 1993 and the Codex Imperialis for Warhammer 40k 2nd edition. The Adeptus Arbites get their own section in the Codex Imperialis. Unfortunately, however, the section is mislabeled in the table of contents, so I'm sure the judges weren't happy about that. Fortunately, when you get to pages 34 and 35, the Adeptus Arbites section is correctly identified. Second edition players could field an Imperial judge tasked with hunting down the enemies of the Imperium, and his or her force of arbitrators, otherwise known as the Warriors of Justice. As the text says, arbitrators are well armed and fanatically loyal to their cause. It also says, quote, they wear a dark uniform and the sinister reflective visor of their helmet hides its wearer's penetrating gaze. In 1995, GW released the first edition of Necromunda, its skirmish-level gang warfare miniatures game set in the bowels of a hive city. This is the 1997 Battles in the Underhive Necromunda supplement, which is a compilation of Necromunda articles from White Dwarf magazine and the Citadel Journal. In it, there is a 5-page article on fielding Adeptus Arbites in games of Necromunda. Apparently, each hive city is divided into precincts, each with its own fortified courthouse and a substantial number of judges. The judges typically don't interfere with how various houses or gangs enforce local justice. Their mandate is to ensure the city's compliance with Imperial law. So they spend a lot of their time rounding up psychers, rebels, and forbidden technology, as well as escorting Imperial luminaries. Judges interact with hive residents as little as possible, but when they do, they are heavily armed. The Arbites combat shotgun, for example, can fire slugs, shot, or the Executioner armor-piercing guided round, which locks onto the target's energy pattern. Adeptus Arbites minis at this time included the Arbites Champion, as well as judges armed with shotguns, bolters, a grenade launcher, and the Power Maul. But there weren't any shield options, even though Necromunda Arbites shock troops could be armed with a Power Maul and a suppression shield. However, the article does showcase Mike McVeigh's converted shock troop models, who are properly armed with riot shields in case they have to repel any Underhive mobs. In addition to Necromunda, you could also field Adeptus Arbites in Warhammer 40k 3rd edition, technically at least, as they are mentioned briefly in 2003's Codex Witch Hunters, the second book of the Inquisition. The Witch Hunters Codex says that since the Ordo Hereticus often calls upon the Adeptus Arbites to aid them in their work, arbitrators can be swapped in for inquisitional stormtroopers in a Witch Hunter force simply by replacing each trooper's hellgun with a shotgun. And in fact, the Adeptus Arbites were lumped in with the Inquisition in GW's 2005-2006 Specialist Games and Classic Range catalog. So around 2002-2003, GW published Necromunda Underhive, which was sort of a consolidated rulebook with some revisions and updates. Then in April of 2004, GW released a special edition of Troll, their direct sales magazine, which showcased their updated range of Necromunda figures, including the new Necromunda Enforcers. So you can see the Enforcers look very similar to the Adeptus Arbites, except these guys are simply Hive City law enforcement as opposed to being interplanetary arbiters of justice. So the Enforcers offered quite a few more options. There was an Enforcers Patrol Team box set, as well as champions, heavies, and even cyber mastiffs, and riot shields were part of the mix. And as for the original Adeptus Arbites figures, they were relegated to the classic range, which meant they were not supported by current rules, or were simply very old and could be discontinued at any time. Games Workshop published rules for using Necromunda Enforcers in the premiere issue of Fanatic magazine, which was also released in 2004. And in those rules, they clarify that while the Adeptus Arbites ensure that Imperial decrees are obeyed across the galaxy, everyday control and policing on the local level usually falls to security forces who are reporting to the local Imperial commander. So while Necromunda Enforcers may be similar to Adeptus Arbites in both appearance and organization, their main job is to keep citizens in line on the street level, while judges and arbiters ensure that Imperial governors and such are obeying the High Lords of Terra. Okay, so that is about as far as my documentation will take me. I know there is a brief mention of the Adeptus Arbites in Warhammer 40k 6th edition. I know you could play a judge or an enforcer in 2001's Inquisitor, and you can play Palonite enforcers in the current incarnation of Necromunda. But as for any other major references outside of the novels, I'm just not sure. If you know of any, please enlighten me, because I'd be very interested. And speaking of the Palonite enforcers, I did purchase a box of those because they looked pretty cool, but I have not assembled them yet because I found there were a lot more parts in there than I expected. I have nothing against 10 to 12 part infantry models, but I guess I prefer metal figs that just have 1 to 3 pieces. That's more my speed these days. And with that in mind, let's look at a couple of affordable metal proxies that I think might work well for Adeptus Arbites or Enforcers if the old metal sculpts aren't available. But first, I'd like to give a shout out to our friend Perry, who painted up this classic metal Arbites champion from years ago. This guy is definitely channeling Judge Dredd. So I think I may have mentioned that I'm a big fan of Void miniatures, which are now sold by Seb Games, that's S-E-B. These miniatures here are Void suppressors with batons, and even though they're a little bit skinnier than the original Arbites, not quite as chunky, I think they make pretty good proxies for Arbiters with shields and power mauls. In Void, the suppressors are the backbone of the Vasa police force, and you can also get suppressor miniatures with assault rifles if you're so inclined. These guys are legionaries, and I think when I bought them, I got them under the Urban Mammoth brand, which is now the Scotia Grendel brand, or maybe they're the same thing, I'm not exactly sure. But regardless, they make pretty good Space Cop proxies too, right down to the eagle on the riot shield. And finally, here is Marshal Clint, the Iron Fist of the Eastern Territories, and his trusty canine. That's his dog on the right, and behind him there to the left is an original Enforcer Cybermastiff, just for comparison. Marshal Clint reminds me a little of Max von Sydow's character from that 1995 Judge Dredd movie. You know, the retired judge, taking the long walk, bringing law to the lawless. So Marshal Clint is sold by Die Hard Miniatures, who make a lot of Oldhammer style fantasy and sci-fi figs. I think their stuff is really great, so if you haven't seen it yet, it is definitely worth checking out. Alright folks, that is a wrap on today's look at the Adeptus Arbites, the Planetary Enforcers, and some proxies for both. If you have any thoughts about these minis or about wargaming in general, please do leave a comment in the comment section. It helps appease the algorithm, and we always like to know what you're thinking. Thanks as always for stopping by. We will be back soon with some more tabletop wargaming madness, but until then, take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.